Hello everyone. I am presenting today on my IEP topic, which is the causes, effects, and solutions for homophobia. I thought this was a really important topic because we talk a lot about social justice and we talk a lot about standing up for marginalized groups of people, but we often leave out the hate and the discrimination that occurs with homophobia and against members of the LGBT community. And so I am going to present a little bit of information about the topic of homophobia from a counseling perspective. Why are we so scared of it? We should stand up against prejudice all the time, but this one manages to fall through the cracks. Hate crime statistics says that 1,393 hate crimes against LGBT individuals happened in 2019, which is almost 20% of the reported hate crimes, all of them, in that year. So let's talk about factors influencing the development of homophobia. There's a lot of things that can be going on in individuals' lives to cause them to commit acts of homophobic violence, but the most common include the sense of toxic masculinity, and I would even argue toxic femininity. There are a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions that go on. There's bullying, there's projection, and there's fundamentalism. And I will go further into each of these topics as we continue, but I wanted to kind of list off some of the main underlying causes for homophobia and for homophobic violence, especially in the United States. So toxic masculinity, basically the basic components of this would be the idea of success, power, and competition. So men are very competitive, they are very motivated by success and power. They also have very restrictive emotionality. This is a toxic trait, as men have emotions as well, but they are not as able to express them to other people. They also restrict affectionate behavior between other men, even if it's in a friendship scenario. Many people who subscribe to toxic masculinity believe that there shouldn't be no contact between men that's in any way affectionate. And then also conflict between work and family relations can influence this toxic masculinity, and this toxic masculinity can therefore influence homophobic ideology and actions. So there's some misconceptions and stereotypes about the LGBT community that a lot of perpetrators of homophobic violence utilize. One of those being is that all members of the LGBT community are mentally ill, that it's some sort of psychopathology in and of itself. They also tend to reduce an individual to the simple characteristic that they are gay or they are lesbian, instead of looking at them as a whole person with multiple different interests and attributes. They also assume that homosexual relationships are surface level, that they don't last very long, that LGBT individuals cannot carry on a long, intimate, healthy relationship, and that they can't be good parents also. And then there's also this kind of idea of like over-identification or patronization based on sexual orientation, which is kind of going along the microaggressive path, but it tends to reduce, it reduces the LGBT individual to a simple characteristic rather than them being a fully grown person with different needs and different interests. So this quote says, LGBT youth commonly feel unsafe in their schools due to high rates of peer victimization, with over 85% experiencing bullying or harassment in school. In-school victimization of LGBT students has been linked to harmful psychological effects such as depression and low self-esteem, as well as lower levels of school connectedness and achievement. So let's talk about this issue and how we as Christians specifically can solve it, and how we can help to mitigate this idea of discrimination in schools and in workplaces where homophobic ideology is pervasive. So the 4 factors influencing acceptance would be something called the person-behavior distinction, which I will talk about in a bit. The kind of just fostering a discussion on the origin of personal prejudice is also important. Practical interventions to prevent violence and bullying, and also a commitment to biblical understanding. So the person-behavior distinction is basically the idea of like love the sinner, hate the sin. We're all sinners. We do not have to like each other's choices, but we should love other people for who they are, who God created them to be. There are kind of 3 levels of acceptance within this person behavior distinction. There's the lowest level, which is like an unacceptable behavior and an unacceptable person. There's the acceptable person being linked to unacceptable behavior. And then there's an acceptable person separated from unacceptable behavior. So basically, like, that last one would be that your actions have nothing to do with who you are. And I think that is a big way to mitigate shame, and it's a good way for people to feel more accepted. But I also think that actions are still an important factor in any situation. So depending on where you fall on that, you can use the person behavior distinction in order to categorize that. Also, the importance of just intelligent discourse. Being able to have honest discussions of stereotypes and developments of your prejudices, talking about worldviews and environments is important in order to reduce this kind of feeling of homophobia and discrimination. Also, just practicing cultural competency and being able to recall personal experiences where you might have experienced a similar emotion, a similar level of discrimination as an LGBT individual. Fostering understanding is very important in order to reduce homophobia in the U.S. Integrating anti-bullying policies can be really helpful in also developing an ecological perspective. I like to say that no decision is made in a vacuum, and so we need to be able to determine environment on both the LGBT individual's side and also whoever's perpetrating any violence or bullying. We need to understand the environment that this person is in before we jump to conclusions about their behavior. And then finally, I wanted to point out some biblical perspectives on our approaching of homophobia. Isaiah 1:17 talks about calling us as believers to seek justice and correct oppression, and also to not rely on our religiosity and our fundamentalism as we make our choices and interact with people. Matthew talks about how loving God is loving our neighbor, and when we support someone who is oppressed or discriminated against, we are supporting God and we are loving God through that. And the idea that we are here to just help people. We are here to minister to others who are in pain, and it's not our job to reveal sin in others, but rather exemplify the love that cleanses all sin. And I would say those are a few biblical perspectives. There's all sorts of other ones, but I think those are fairly important and relevant. So those are the sources that I used, and I thank you so much for paying attention, and I hope that you'll be able to kind of look at your own prejudice and you'll be able to understand how to recognize homophobia in your church or in your workplace in the future. Thanks so much.